Welcome to the Main Street Minute with equestrian marketing expert India Wilkinson. This is the destination for all things equestrian, from horse sales, breeding, horse health, and a look into the intricacies of the horse business world. Join India as she dives in with industry leaders to discuss the challenging and rewarding lifestyle of being in the equestrian world. And get ready for the Main Street Minute.
Hi there, this is India Wilkinson with the Main Street Minute, and today I am super excited to introduce Kelly Vineyard. She's an equine nutritionist, and she is going to tell us all kinds of things about equine nutrition. And I'm excited because this is definitely a topic that is kind of controversial. People definitely have their opinions. So Kelly, let's just jump in and get started. I met you on LinkedIn, which I always talk about. I love LinkedIn for equestrians. It's definitely a platform that I don't think is used like it should be. But why don't you tell us about what you do, and then we'll just jump right in.
Yeah, well, thank you. And yes, it was great to be connected with you on LinkedIn. I, too, am a big fan of the platform. So I'm a PhD equine nutritionist, and I went to school to become a nutritionist for many, many years. I started with a degree in animal science from Auburn University, and then I came to the University of Florida to get both my master's degree and my PhD in equine nutrition. No better place to study horses and nutrition than Central Florida, in my opinion. Go Gators. But that was many, many years ago. And when I finished my PhD, I actually went to work for one of the largest feed manufacturers in the United States, which was Purina Animal Nutrition. I was on the R&D and technical solutions teams there for over 16 years. And then just last year, I actually left my comfy corporate role and started my own independent consulting business. And so now I focus on, empowering manufacturers, supplement and feed manufacturers, veterinarians, horse owners, into making good science-based decisions for nutrition.
Well, I love that. And it sounds like you definitely have a lot of credentials behind that. I do have to say, though, the Go Gators, since my husband will be listening, all four of our kids went to UGA, so I'll have to say Go Dogs.
Okay, there you go.
There you go. So I know that as a horse owner, just the world of nutrition is so hard because you cannot ask a horse, how are you feeling? How is this affecting you? So I want to get into that a little bit later, but did you always want to do this? Did you know, like when you went to school, have you always been fascinated with, because this is truly a science behind this. This isn't just like, I like this feed, but there's truly a science behind this. How did you decide to go into this?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a science, and it's a very niche science, to be honest with you. And when I was a kid, I was just a horse crazy girl, taking riding lessons and mucking stalls so I could, earn my riding lessons pretty much like everybody else did back in the day. And I thought I wanted to be a vet because I was so horse obsessed, but I also was really fascinated with science. I really thought that was the only thing you could do to pair your horse obsession with science, was to become a horse vet. And I definitely was on that path through college, but I had a very good mentor who introduced me to the science of nutrition. And he said, you can just study feeding horses in graduate school. And I was like, sign me up. So that's actually kind of how I got started. I just had a really good mentor and ended up getting both my master's and my PhD. And that really involved doing research studies looking at how nutrition affects horse health.
We could talk for a couple of hours on this, I'm sure, because this can go in so many different ways. But, you were saying like back in the day, because I don't know what we fed back in the day. And it's crazy.
A coffee can of this,
right? Exactly. Literally a coffee can.
I remember calf manna was like the first feed, and it didn't even have horse on it. It was calf manna. Right.
And it's so funny how, the entire animal health world has evolved so much, because absolutely. The same thing with our dog, the bag of dry dog food, and you'd scoop it out in solo cup and throw it in the bowl, and you never thought twice about we just didn't think about it. It just wasn't something that was important, although we expected a lot from our animals back then as well, So this is going to be a tough question, but why is it so important? Why is nutrition so important?
Well, I do get this question a lot, and I actually love answering it because it is important, because it influences every single thing in the horse's body. every single day. Horses build and maintain muscle, but they also have bones, hooves, immune function, and the nutrients they consume are basically the building blocks to support those systems. And feed is more than just energy. It's more than just fiber to fill the gut. It's truly the raw material that the body has to use to grow, to repair, and to respond to stress. And you take it a step further. You talk about asking a lot of our horses now, and from a performance perspective, and I'm a performance horse rider. I ride dressage, and I show, and so I'm very aware of performance. And I do feel that nutrition sets kind of like the upper limit of your horse's potential, like in the show ring. So you of course you have training, which builds fitness, builds the skills you need for your sport. But nutrition is going to determine how well that horse adapts to that training, how they respond, how they recover. And then, most importantly, staying sound, like over time. And you can't out train a nutritional gap, or a poor diet, because there's always going to be a point where you hit that kind of that limiting factor of your poor nutrition. So, you've got one talented, well-trained, well-bred, well-nourished horse. They're always going to have an advantage over a talented, well-trained, well-bred, poorly nourished horse. So it really comes into play on in performance, and that way is it's setting your upper limit.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm also a dressage rider. Yeah. I was an event rider. And that's really, when I was eventing, it's really where I started to learn how important nutrition was because of my trainer, and just understanding that, it was the basis of everything. And they took that very seriously, and that has helped me as I went on to have my own farm, and I was helping other people with their horses, and just really understanding and also really listening, watching, and seeing those signs in horses when they're not happy and they're not performing well. Like, what are some common mistakes that people make in their nutrition decisions?
Well, I've been doing this for a while, and I've seen a lot of them. And I will say, no one wants to make mistakes, and no one is that I ever come across is not trying to pay attention and not trying to do the right thing. But there are some gaps in knowledge, and there's so much conflicting information out there too, that it sometimes can be hard to know what's right, and it can be easy to make a mistake. So from my perspective, I think probably one of the most repeated mistakes that I see are people underestimating the importance of proper quality forage, feeding good quality forage and feeding the right amount of forage. Sometimes it's too little, but sometimes it can be too much too. If you have an overweight horse, if you think about the amount of feed your horse eats in a day, let's say, 2% of their body weight, 20 pounds a day, a very, very large proportion of that is forage. But we as horse owners, we pay so much attention to the supplements and the feeds, which is 5%, 10%, maybe 20% of the diet. But the large majority is your forage. So really understanding that that's the building block of a good diet, and then building your rest of your ration from there. You can get really far ahead if you just start with your forage.
I learned something recently that I thought was so fascinating, because I'd never thought about this before, but there were some horses at a friend's barn that just kind of stopped doing well. They just started to kind of it was different owners, different disciplines, but same barn, same feeding program. And they did, and I'm going to ask you about the blood work stuff later, because they did do blood work, and they found that all three of these horses had a vitamin E deficiency.
Yes, absolutely. That can be a common issue.
Okay. And that comes from grass and hay, right? Is that
the very best source of vitamin E? Is fresh green grass in a horse's diet. Yes. So a lot of our horses that don't have access to fresh green pasture, they're relying on their hay and then in their, feed to get the vitamin E from it. Yeah.
So is that something like, we can just buy a bottle of vitamin E, vitamins. I mean, good. But is that something that people can do? Can you source different types of supplements?
So absolutely. I mean, there are vitamin E supplements out there, and that We could talk a whole hour on supplement selection. Um, I, in talking about blood work as well, that is actually one of the nutrients that you can look at the status of a horse pretty effectively with a blood test, and you can tell where they are for vitamin E. So I don't recommend everybody just willy-nilly supplement vitamin E.
Right.
A lot of horses are perfectly adequate, but a lot of horses are not. And poor quality forage that may be old, or if it's really brown, it probably doesn't have a lot of vitamin E in it. Now, if you're feeding a fortified feed, like from a reputable manufacturer that's got a nutritionist on staff who's formulating it, hopefully it has enough vitamin E. It should have enough vitamin E in there to sort of fill in those gaps of the forage. But if it doesn't, there's some really good quality natural source vitamin E supplements. Natural source is a little bit better absorbed. So if I'm supplementing, I will go with a natural source vitamin E. And you don't want to overdo it either. A lot of people think, oh, if a little's good, more is better. Not always. And so that's why it's helpful to work with your vet, pull some blood, kind of see where your horse is at, and then go from there.
So I did want to talk about that, about the pulling blood, because as for people, like I see a functional doctor, she does functional medicine, and we pulled a massive blood panel, which is, I think everybody should do as a human, because it's great to know where you're deficient and what you can do. It's changed my life. Like it just absolutely changed my life. I'm on the right supplements now, the right amount, and all the things. And how do you do that for horses? Like,
so blood work can be useful in horses as well, but it doesn't work the same way in horses as it does in humans. Specifically for assessing nutritional status. There's a lot of nutrients in the horse's body that are very tightly regulated in the blood. So you may take like calcium, for example, and you may look at the calcium level in the blood, and it's not going to indicate their dietary status, because the horse's body really tries to keep it in this very narrow concentration. So a normal blood value doesn't always mean the diet is balanced, and an abnormal value also may not reflect a deficiency. It actually may more likely reflect a health issue. And so, but there are some nutrients that the blood is very good at. I mentioned vitamin E. That's blood's a good indicator. Some of the other fat soluble vitamins as well. But when you go to like trace minerals, blood's terrible. You can't tell the status of a horse, of their mineral status. The most reliable way to assess whether or not a horse is getting what they need is through a ration analysis. And, this is what PhD nutritionists are trying to do. But this entails, first we go through a full diet history with your horse that includes their age, body weight, body condition score, health issues, and everything they're currently being fed, forage, feed, and supplements. And I always have to ask people I'm working with, all right, do you feed any supplements? Okay, well, what about biotin? Well, that counts. What about salt? Well, that counts too. Like I want to know every single thing that goes in that horse's mouth. And then I'm going to kind of put that in like a program and do some math and compare all of the nutrients they're getting on a daily basis versus their nutrient requirements as defined by science. And so that comes in a couple different places. The NRC, nutrient requirements for horses, is one, but other, scientific research or evidence-based research and data. And that informs what they should be getting, and we compare that, and then we'll make adjustments, based on what we see in that analysis, to basically bring that horse up into a good status. And I will say, it's not always that horses are deficient. Sometimes when I do, these horses are excess or in excess. And I think in our modern horse management, and especially like, those of us who are in the performance horse world, we're trying to do the best we can. I actually do see more people overdoing it than underdoing it, and oftentimes. And that can be just as problematic as underdoing it. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a horse that had bladder stones recently, and that's a very painful condition. Fortunately, they can be removed. But do you know what the bladder stones were caused by? An over excess of calcium in the diet. A long-term supplementation. She actually had this horse on about 6 or 7 different supplements, and they all supplied calcium. So when you added it all up together, it was way in excess. And but fortunately, we were able to fix it. But you can kill a horse with kindness too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, it makes so much sense when you say that. It's not something I thought about when we were going to get on this podcast, but
Mhm.
you're so right. There are, I would say, everyone that I know is trying to do the best
We
by
are.
their horses, and
Absolutely.
they just don't know. Something that I learned a long time ago, though, was, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I worked with a nutritionist when I had my own farm, and we had 12 horses, and I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the right plan and all the, and
Hmm.
what I didn't realize was if you have a really, really good feed, you shouldn't have to throw money. And I do think I know there are great supplements out
Right.
there, and I love supplements and they're necessary. But like you said, like you're throwing money at more making, feeling like, oh, I'm doing all of this. But if you have
Mhm.
a really, really good feed, you shouldn't have to over supplement. Do you agree with that?
100% agree with that. I mean, I talked about starting one of the common mistakes people make is underestimating the importance of forage. Another common mistake is feeding unproven and unnecessary supplements. That's actually really up on the top of the list too. Because if you are feeding a good feed or a ration balancer or a good vitamin mineral supplement and you're covering your nutritional bases, it's there's still room for what I like to say, like targeted supplementation, but
Mhm.
you just want to be very measured about your selection. Make sure they're evidence based. Make sure they come from a reputable manufacturer. One of the other common mistakes I see, which leads to feeding unnecessary supplements, I would say, is following bad nutrition advice from a random internet stranger with no nutrition training or credentials. And I know there's a lot of people out there on TikTok or on Instagram or Facebook groups that, everyone who owns a horse does have expertise in their own horse's nutrition. I give them that, absolutely. But what they don't have expertise is your horse and a broad like spectrum of equine nutrition advice. So I think it's really important for us as horse owners to just be a good filter of the information we take in. Sometimes somebody will make a good suggestion, but then you can follow that up with doing your own research, asking your own veterinarian, going to reputable sources online to get information. Or if you're a real nutrition nerd, you can get a nutrition textbook. But there's university websites, articles or online content put out by experts with credentials that actually went to school for equine nutrition, and that have experience in the industry. Those are all good sources of information. And yes, it might come from a feed manufacturer website. A lot of good reputable manufacturers hire PhDs. That's where we go to work. So, but we have that educational background. And then certainly there are good independent nutritionists out there too. But just because someone is a horse owner and has fed a horse for 40 years doesn't make them a nutrition expert. It may make them an expert on their own horse's management, but not the broader spectrum of horse equine nutrition science.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. I wanted to bring up a couple of things. One of our sponsored riders, when she sells a horse, she always sends it with a care package of
I love
a
that.
bag. I do too.
Mhm.
A bag
Yeah,
of feed, coupons for the feed,
yeah.
all the things with very detailed. And I love this because it's like she's like, at least I'm doing my part. What they do, what they choose to do after that, but she'll explain this is how this horse is performing on this, and I love that too. So
Well, and the other thing is when you sell a horse or when you get a new horse, that's a really stressful point in a
mhm.
horse's life. And changing feed is also stressful on the horse's gut. So, like, kind of mitigating one change and keeping them on the same feed for a while until you kind
Mhm.
of figure out your new environment, that's going to help minimize stress on that horse during that transition.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. That makes a lot of sense.
hay too,
So,
not just feed, hay also.
and
That's
hey, right? Yeah,
important too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so in my own journey with supplements, like I can say, oh, this vitamin D plus or vitamin B plus folate makes me feel better. I have more energy.
Hmm.
So I can express that. I can feel that. I can journal that. But with horses, it's so hard and it takes so long because the same thing in my in my supplement journey, we didn't throw everything in. I started with one thing and then we added something else because we wanted to make sure which one is helping me, what's helping me feel better. So
Yeah.
I think that's just the hardest part with horses, with trying to figure out what is going to help them to feel their best, give them help them be comfortable, help them perform at their best. And, like, it's hard. How do you do that?
Yeah,
Because you start them on something and then you have to wait a couple of months, right? To see if
that's right.
it's, yeah.
Well, I always go back to, again, with horses, we can start with a ration analysis.
Yes. Okay.
Let the numbers do the talking, okay? And then from there, there are some nutrients that horses, yeah, they may have a base requirement for, but there may be some like other nutrients that may not have a like essential requirement, but they do have some benefits in the horse. So you as an owner can assess whether or not a supplement is doing what it's supposed to do a couple different ways. The first thing, I mean, and this was actually back from when I was with Purina, we came up with this test ride, like test ride. You take your horse on a test ride when you're going to buy a new horse. Well, you should take your supplements on a test ride too. And I love this acronym because it reminds me RIDE. So R stands for research. Does the supplement have research behind it? Is it evidence backed? I, do the ingredients make sense? So if I want joint support for my horse, do the ingredients in there actually have data that say that it's a joint supplement? If it's something kind of off the wall that I've never heard of, it probably fails the I. D, and D is very important. Is it the right dose or delivered amount? So yes, it may have some glucosamine in there, but is it enough glucosamine to actually do anything? There's an awful lot of supplements who fail the D. Okay. And
Wow.
then E is your final letter, and that's efficacy. And that's you as the writer making note, feed the supplement for 30 days, for 60 days. Does it really have efficacy? Is it doing what you think it's going to do? If it's a calming supplement, is it really having an effect? If it's a coat supplement, does your horse's coat look shinier after 60 days? Make sure you go back and reassess it, because it really gets easy to just buy something and then just start feeding it out of habit and never reevaluating it. So I think that between a ration analysis and very strategic selection of supplements, that's how you can keep yourself out of trouble.
Well, it sounds like too, and I've never done this, but I think now it would be a really good idea to journal those things, because
Yeah,
you do forget.
you do.
Like, and by keeping track of all that, the mayor was
Jot it down on your barn
and
calendar or on
yeah,
your
yeah,
t-shirt.
yeah.
I
That's
do
a
it all
really
the
good
time.
idea.
I experiment with supplements all the time. I mean, I do my little N of one experiment. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I like to say I'm like skeptical optimism.
Yes.
That's what I approach it with, for sure.
What do you think? Well, but what are some signs that a horse would show you if their nutrition might be off? Like, I mean, obviously the low energy, but what are some other things that a horse might do? Or trying to, I mean, I do feel like horses are always trying to communicate with us, whether they're happy or unhappy or don't know what we're asking. But
Yeah,
how would they
gosh,
communicate that?
there's a lot of different ways. I'm trying to think, kind of most commonly. I think one of the, and this is related to nutrition, but it's also related to just like volume of forage and gut health. Especially in performance horses, I see a lack of dry matter intake. They're not getting enough hay. They're standing around for 6, 7, 8 hours with nothing to munch on. And so those horses, they tend to have more gastric distress. They show signs of ulcers and discomfort. They may not have really good manure quality. They are just more anxious because nature wants them to eat all the time. And when they can't do that, that's a major stressor. So that they'll show you that. And frequent colic is another thing related to hay, especially poor quality hay. If you have a barn full of horses and you have multiple colics within a few weeks, I always go, let's take a hay sample. There may be something off with the forage quality there. In terms of like nutrients, and so one thing we have in Florida is non-sweaters. Okay.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Bless you if you have a horse with anhydrosis. But what a lot of people don't realize is that just a simple electrolyte deficiency can be one of the causes of a decreased sweating or a stop sweating. So make sure these horses, especially in the summer, are on a good quality electrolyte. They're getting enough electrolytes. And yes, horses still have anhidrosis even when they're electrolyte adequate. And then there's some other things, that you would do to address that. But from a nutritional standpoint, that's something that's often overlooked, I would say, is just feeding
Yes.
electrolytes.
Same with people, by the way, with hydration,
Right.
Yeah.
It's so important. I mean,
Yeah.
my son runs cross country and, so these kids run all the time and he's in high school and they don't pay attention to their nutrition half the time. And, kids are falling out cramping all the time because they didn't eat a good breakfast or they didn't, electrolyte replenish like they
Mhm.
should have. And yes, the body responds when it doesn't have enough electrolytes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So with everything, you've been doing this a long time, and you obviously have a lot of experience. But what's the most rewarding thing? What about your job? What's the most
Oh,
rewarding thing?
You know, the most rewarding thing I think I'm doing now, especially, is I really love helping to translate good science into real world solutions that make horses' lives better. Now that I'm an independent consultant, I get to work with, companies that care, reputable companies. We develop evidence-based solutions to the challenges that we're all facing every day with our horses. Whether it's competition stress or forage variability or forage quality issues or managing a medical condition. When you apply nutrition thoughtfully and based on science principles, it can be extremely powerful. And then, I'd say equally rewarding is just like communicating with horse owners and empowering horse owners to make better, more informed decisions, about what they're doing with their horses and help you and help them understand the why, not just the what. And so when horse owners feel confident about what they're doing, the horses are healthier, they're making better choices, we're less stressed, pick your good feed and then like go focus on your training, and you can enjoy the process more because, when our horses are thriving, we thrive. So it's like a mutually beneficial thing. And so I just love helping horses and people, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Oh, that's so cool. So, if somebody wanted to work with you, do you work with individuals? Do you only tell me about that? Do you only
Yeah,
work
so
with companies or?
that's a great question. So right now, I have a website. It's equivinephd.com. So my company is Equivine PhD Nutrition. I'm also on LinkedIn, like as you said, Kelly Vineyard PhD. And I do focus on working with companies and industry and manufacturers, make better science-based products. But I also work with veterinarians and I work with horse owners through their veterinarians. So definitely medical conditions or tricky situations. There are a lot of good independent nutritionists that do consultations with horse owners. And if I can't help someone, if someone is looking for that, definitely reach out to me. And if I can't help you, I can refer you to somebody who's reputable. So happy to do that.
Okay, so do you have to be on site or like say a trainer has a barn full of 20 horses and you're in Florida and they're in Virginia. Do you
Yeah.
have to be on site or is that something that you could help them with virtually or?
Yeah, I've been doing virtual consults my entire career. Honestly, I love being on site.
Yeah.
It's ideal. You can put your hands on horses and oftentimes I'll see things that people don't tell me that do play a role into like our recommendations. But yes, virtual consults can be very effective. But there's nothing like an in-person one, that's for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Well, like you said, you would see things that maybe not, even though like you said, horse owners typically know their horses really well, but you may
Right.
pick up on something that they're like, oh, I didn't even notice that.
It's happened many, many times. Especially a lot of times I'll get called in when there's some sort of weird problem going on and everybody's been scratching their heads and they can't figure it out. And maybe a veterinarian will bring me in. And it does take a little bit of like sleuthing and detective work sometimes to figure out what may be causing some of these nutritionally related issues. And, maybe it's the management, maybe it's the forage, maybe it's excessive minerals in the water,
Oh yeah.
and you don't know unless you test the water. So there's all sorts of weird stuff that happens that over time and with experience, you start to figure some of those things out. But yeah.
Well, my favorite thing that you said today was empowering horse owners, because that is just, it's so profound, because that is exactly what most owners, most riders, they want to feel empowered. They want to do the best by their horses. And I love that you can help people do that. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, they could do that through LinkedIn or your website.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And I would say, nutrition is not complicated. And if someone tells you that it is, they're wrong. It should not be complicated. It's good forage. It's being very careful to select good quality products to fill in the nutritional gaps of your forage, and very mindful supplementation only when necessary. You will do great things for your horse, and it shouldn't require a PhD to feed your horse. I'm here to fix all the problems and to make everybody else's life a little bit easier. So you don't need a PhD to be able to feed your horse well.
We'll count on you for that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again for being on with us today. I really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on the Main Street Minute.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please let us know. Email support@mainstreetmarket.com. Please share and join us again next week for another episode of the Main Street Minute, right here on the Equus Radio Network.